Hello and welcome back to the HIPAA Insider Show, where we focus on making complex compliance topics available to everyone. Today, we're revisiting one of our most popular topics, WordPress. Gil, we covered this a while back, all the way back in episode 2, actually, but a lot has happened, particularly over the past couple of years and the beginning of this year, 2025, with some major proposed changes to the HIPAA Security Rule. So the title of this episode is HIPAA WordPress in 2026, what changed and what still matters. Well, okay, let's start with the big picture. What's the, if you had to sum up the single biggest shift a WordPress user needs to be aware of heading into 2026, what would that be?
Sure. So the HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, they published what's called an NPRM for the security rule in 2025, in early 2025. The final ruling will come out sometime in the middle of 2026 or so. And so why does this matter? What's the key takeaway? Well, they're going to have a distinction between required and addressable safeguards. So what used to be a recommendation or something that, would be nice to have or good to have, that flexibility is going to become a mandate. It's no longer going to be, well, if you can do it or if you want to do it. Now it's going to be you have to do it. So, for example, small clinics or business associates using WordPress, this means that the security standards have become more strict. And so I think this is very important for everyone to realize. So there is some time. The good news is there's some time. You don't have to panic, but you should start preparing so that you know what to do and have things done in time for the mandate that's going to come out in later in 2026.
Yeah, that's a huge shift. So for a typical small, medium-sized business that's in the healthcare space, using a WordPress site for, let's say, patient info or internal portal, what would be the 3 most pressing technical requirements that they can't ignore?
Yeah, that's a good way to ask that question, Adam. Just the top few things that you can remember in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them is going to be that multi-factor code that everyone's used to these days. And I remember as a side comment, it used to be a big deal. People are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have an extra code to type in. But now everyone's used to it. All the banks do it. Most of the big platform providers, everyone does that these days. So that's going to become mandated. So where your web application, your medical and healthcare app needs to send that extra code. So username, password, that's the current method, and then on top of that typically a 6-digit code that goes out to a cell phone or via email typically, or it could be a Google Authenticator, but that extra code is going to become mandatory. The other one, Adam, is going to be to encrypt the electronic protected health information. So before we were talking about just in transit. So that's encryption when you're sending data through the internet to make sure that HTTPS is there, and that REST is also important. So what does that REST mean? It REST means that when you power off a database server, you power off a web server, in the powered off state, you have to have that encrypted. And then finally, there's the databases. When the databases are up and running, are those fields encrypted? And that one, I'm not sure, Adam, if that one's going to be mandated or not. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But that's another one that could be mandated, where you have to encrypt the patient information that's in the database when the database is powered on. Not just when it's powered off, because that's already done, or in transit, the data is arriving to the database. But we're talking about when the database is just idling, sitting there. Those fields may have to be encrypted as well. Finally, the last one, Adam, is the vulnerability scanning every 6 months and penetration testing annually. So that to me, that's a concern. I'll tell you why, because as you know, Adam, we've worked with a lot of penetration scanning scanners, professional scanning companies and consultants, and man, that is expensive. I'm a little worried about that one. We'll have to see. I mean, a vulnerability scan is inexpensive. That's actually very inexpensive because it could be automated. It's just a utility that scans. But when you're talking penetration testing, that involves a professional guru hacking, white hacker type guy. You know, that could be a real expensive one. So that's something that we should probably talk about in another episode.
Yeah, definitely a couple of important notes there as well. And we are recording in December 2025. The final rules exact language from HHS still need to be confirmed. That's expected in 2026. But yeah, these are the top three. Okay, what about business associate agreements? Since WordPress sites often use dozens of plugins and third-party services, how do these changes affect the business associate and business associate agreement relationships?
Well, the relationship between two companies that are both touching or handling protected health information, the covered entities are now required to obtain the annual written confirmation that their associates have implemented the necessary technical safeguards like the encryption and the two-factor. So before, you would just sign the BA, file it in your cabinet, be done, you know, don't worry about it, out of sight, out of mind. Now that's not good enough. Every year you have to get an attestation that yes, your partner is doing the right thing, and yes, they're encrypting things and all of that. On top of that, if an incident happens, so let's say there is a breach of some kind, then the business associate has to notify the covered entity within a much tighter window. The proposed rule mentions they must notify the covered entity within 24 hours of activating a contingency plan. This means the covered entities need to review their BAs with their host and any compliant form plugins they use to ensure they align with these heightened obligations. So that's a little bit more administrative work, I would say.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how that particular part of the rule is worded when it comes to how much time the BAs have to notify the covered entity. But yeah, we'll see how that one goes. And when is it? You know, I mean, it's not going to be when the breach happens. It's going to be when, after a certain amount of time, once it's detected. So yeah, we'll keep tuned in for that and definitely let you know in a follow-up episode. Okay, the next area we want to talk about is what still matters, Gil. You know, what's still relevant even after the rule changes.
Well, for those interested in hosting with WordPress, which a lot of customers do, WordPress is something that's very popular. I've heard stats that say that up to, you know, at least 60% of the websites out there are made with the content management system called WordPress. So it's a piece of software that sits on a web server, right? But there is a company behind WordPress. You know, there's an actual organization, let's call it. And they, as far as we know, they're not going to be signing any kind of a BAA agreement, right? That the WordPress, the company, won't be signing that. So that's something we should be aware of. That doesn't change anything, though. You can still use WordPress to host your site and to have patient information traversing through that platform. But you need to make sure you button it up and do all the right things. So just as an example, I know this gets technical and people's eyes glaze over, like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Well, what I'm talking about is WordPress is like a house. And you could buy a house and move in and just pretend everything's great. Or you can move in the house and put an alarm system and put magnets on all the windows, so somebody opens the window, you know, alarm goes off, and have protection. So that's what we're talking about. So you can enter a house. So WordPress is like that house. So you could just ignore everything and just hope nothing happens. That's not good. You got to move into your house and you got to have the right provider, like HIPAA Vault, of course, that's what we do, but you got to protect everything well. So that hasn't changed, right? That's going to continue moving in the future. We need to really button down the hatches, make sure all the windows are closed, the alarm's set, do everything we have to do to really protect that WordPress house.
Yeah, maybe have a, contract with a security company that does, security software or something like that as well. And to expand the analogy a little bit, that would be a business associate, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the associate, I like that. The associate would be like, for example, for your house, you contract to have the garbage man, garbage woman pick up your trash. Or you have a lawn company, they come in to mow your lawn, and they're coming to pick up your trash, and they're coming to spray for weeds, and they're coming to clean your pool. All those vendors that come to your house to do all this extra work that you don't want to do, that's the same thing with WordPress. You may have, your vendors coming in, which are your plugins and all of that. You have to make sure they're all vetted and make sure everything is working properly to ensure there's no breach. We can also talk about the 2026 relevance. The proposed rule emphasizes a required technology asset inventory network map. So you have to keep inventory of your assets now too. It's not just good enough to secure your WordPress site. You need to have a list of your assets. Like maybe you have 3 websites. Maybe you have 3 websites, and you also have, maybe you have your own server that you manage. You have to basically have an inventory list of basically anywhere PHI can travel through and rest at. Those places, that's an easy way for you to remember, network diagram. Well, how is my PHI data? Where is it living? Where does it rest? Where does it travel throughout the day? Just think about it logically. And then on the back of a napkin, you can draw the diagram. So you need to have that, and then you need to keep up with that inventory to make sure that whatever's on that paper, whatever's on your map, you need to make sure that's being updated regularly, right? Because all these things need to be upgraded, the firmware, the software, all those things need to be kept up to date.
So the BAA and the coordination of the BAAs and management of those, data handling, segmentation, and then what about, administrative controls are still a challenge, right, in 2026?
Yeah, that's a real challenge. People get tired of that because it's kind of not mind-numbing work to make sure that your theme and your plugins are all updated, and it's constant work, right?
Admin work.
Yeah, it's admin work, but it's important. I'll tell you why it's so important, even though it can be mind-numbing to do that work. It's very important because what we've observed is that a substantial amount, I'd even go out on a limb and say that the majority of the hacks that we know about happen through a plugin. So WordPress core is solid, but there's some plugin that is added that's got a vulnerability that's exploitable. And so you look at that and go, well, why did that happen? Well, guess what? That plugin was out of date. It was a year old, right? Whoever owned that plugin didn't maintain it. They didn't upgrade it. They didn't pay for the license, or they just forgot to hit the update button to update that plugin to the latest secure version. So plugins are really, really important to keep up to date, and it's something that you have to just put on a regular schedule. I would say once a month, Adam, that's sufficient. If somebody's really diligent, they can do it weekly, but at least once a month, that's a known solid time frame that technical advisors will, all agree to. One, monthly cycle is pretty fair way to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely manageable monthly. Okay, well, that's incredibly helpful, Gil. And I think summing up, the message is clear. Core compliance work hasn't changed moving into 2026, but the pressure and documentation requirements have intensified. For our listeners who might be scrambling to prepare for next year, what are 2 immediate action items that they should take this week? Well,
at least have a shift in your mindset saying, hey, I'm going to enjoy the rest of the year, have your eggnog with your family and all that. But start thinking about, okay, next year I want to document what I have. This is the inventory, right? You're going to say, well, I'm just going to, and remember as business owners, don't get caught up with, well, that I'm not technical, Gil, and I'm not going to do that. No, don't do that, because if you do that, what you're doing is you're giving, as an owner, responsibility to something that really, if something goes wrong, they're going to sue you, not your technical staff. They don't sue your technical manager. They're going to sue you. So that means you need to take ownership. Now, that doesn't mean you skip the technical guy. What it does mean is you hold them accountable and you say, look, I need to have a full inventory of all my items, of everything that we have where the protected health information flows through every single step. And then you think
Yeah.
about it yourself, and then you work as a team and you write it down, and you start doing that in January. Once you have that list done, you're off to the races. At that point, you have a good starting point. You have a good list, and then you start working through the list and say, okay, I've got all these things. Are we keeping that software up to date? And ping us at HIPAA Vault. We can help you with the cloud portion of your inventory. If something's out in the cloud, we can help you with that. Start documenting your digital assets and start thinking about, hey, is my site, does it have two-factor authentication enabled, or do people just log in? Do your users just log in, username, password? Is that it? Or do you enforce that extra token or that extra code? So make sure you start thinking about doing that. By the way, none of these things by themselves are that crazy hard. Like, oh my, it's overwhelming.
Right.
What's overwhelming is just staying on top of it and starting. Starting's always overwhelming, right? Like, oh my gosh, I got to do this. But once you write it down and once you kind of get into a rhythm, it's not that bad, but you need to have the right mindset where this isn't going away. This isn't something you could just set it and forget it. You've got to.
Yeah, it just becomes like taking out the trash. It's a necessary thing that is done regularly. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, great advice there, Gil. And it circles back to our overall mission. Compliance doesn't have to be overwhelming if you partner with the experts who focus on making enterprise-level security available for and accessible for everyone. Thank you for walking us through this. And look forward to a great 2026. That's it for this episode. Thanks for stopping by.